Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us. You are watching School Psych Podcast. Happy to be here tonight. We're going to hopefully, we're cheering. We were just having a conversation too. My webcam made me a little bit pink tonight. I got a new one. And Dr. Faustino was like, oh, let me switch mine. I have a webcam that turns me a little bit purple. So we're a little bit, he's making me feel better with his webcam now. But welcome. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Rachel. I'm a School Psych in Maryland. I'm going to pass it over to Rebecca, who's going to talk about how you can participate if you're joining us live tonight. Rebecca.
Hello, everybody. I'm so excited to share some exciting news about participation because we are slowly making a choice to leave X. Turns out that some of the conversations that happen on X are not so helpful to the ways we feel most of the days, not the conversations that school psychologists are having, but others on X. And so from now on, we're going to begin to represent our podcast on Threads and Blue Sky. And so please look for me there. I will post links to both of those profiles on the Facebook pages where we still are, where you can find us on School Psych, Your School Psychologist, and the School Psych podcast page. And we hope to gather a community of school psychologists on these other platforms that are hopefully more positive and, sharing messages of hope and the ways in which we can show up at work and do our jobs to help kids thrive. And so I look forward to seeing more of you out there on these other places. And so if you're logged in right now and watching the YouTube video, please do chime in alongside the video. Even if you didn't tune in right at 7 p.m. Eastern when we started, your comments will sync up to the place in the video and we will be able to see them. And that's a great way to join in the live discussion, ask questions, share your experiences and thoughts, and just where you are and what you're doing. And we love that live conversation as an opportunity to really be together in this moment and in this broadcast. But if you're listening later at a later date, you can also chime in because we get notifications about the conversation, and you can send us messages on either of the Facebook pages or on Blue Sky or on Threads. And we will currently right now, I have the same Twitter handle on Blue Sky. It's at Becca Kamiz. And I will eventually figure out how to make a dedicated podcast page on there as well. So looking for you on all places, but looking forward to participating in the conversation together over time. And now I'm going to hand it off to Eric, who will introduce himself and our wonderful, wonderful guest.
All right. Thanks, Rebecca. Well, I don't think our guest needs any introduction, but I'm going to give him a little props. We've had Dr. Peter Faustino on a couple of times before, and we've had the pleasure of sharing the presentation podium with him at various times and events. And I think you all know Dr. Faustino is a school psychologist in Scarsdale, New York, and holds a PsyD, and is our illustrious leader of our National Association of School Psychologists. And I've heard him speak a number of times, but at NASP just recently in October, Peter gave the most incredible keynote that was so encouraging and so touching and moving. And all of us in the room, hundreds of school psychologists in the room were sitting there sort of filled with positive emotion and connectedness and just this sort of glow in knowing that we're making a difference in people's lives, and we're caring about children, and we're supporting people, and we're working together as colleagues. And I walked away from that. It was just a very powerful moment. And I thought, here we are. We snagged Peter last minute. Here we are at the end of School Psych Week, National School Psychology Week. And we've had this election where I think a lot of us in education are kind of sad and disappointed and worried about, dismantling of certain areas in the government that perhaps we feel might protect the students that we work with and work for, and the families and some of the more vulnerable people in our society. And so I thought, what better person, if Peter's available, can we snag him to just talk about his thoughts right now, and maybe share that kind, encouraging word that he shared in at NIASP, or a little bit of that, and just the energy that Peter brings is wonderful, and the level of encouragement as a leader in our association, we all need that. And so, Peter, we welcome you and we thank you for joining us. And
Thank
we want
you.
to, share this moment with you. Yeah.
No. I mean, that's a big introduction. So I really appreciate it, Eric. And in particular, the part that you shared about your experience with my keynote, because I haven't talked to too many people about the behind the scenes of developing the keynote, but I really did feel the pressure back in July and maybe even before, when I was trying to develop it, thinking I have to go around the country and represent NASP. I mean, this is the largest association representing school psychologists. What in the world am I going to say? I mean, what is it that I can offer? And as I was really dwelling on what I wanted to create, it sort of came back to me being a practitioner and the work that I've done for 28 years, in particular with students, individual students and families, was what I just kept coming back to as I started to think about what it is. And then really, it was me asking myself questions like, why do I love school psychology? And why do I get so excited and have energy after all these years? And when I started receiving messages from former students and families, I was like, what did I actually do that made this sort of impact? And so that's the keynote that Eric is referring to, which, I've been going around to different states. I've been getting really amazing feedback after I give the presentation. I joke sometimes that I've sat in the seats listening to other keynotes for many, many years, that I knew I didn't want it to be sort of like informational. I wanted it to be inspirational, and I'm hoping I tapped into something. So clearly Eric approves, but Eric is like one of my fangirls, right? I mean, so I feel like I could have just opened up War and Peace and read from it at the keynote, and Eric would have been like, Pete's so great. It was an amazing keynote. And I'd just be like reading from a boring book, so.
We do have a lot of fans out there.
And you're not wrong, by the way.
And, we've joked here before, because Eric and Rebecca are so positive all the time. And so when they're like angry or dismayed with somebody, like we've talked about, like, they don't curse. They don't like to get them cursed. Like I feel like I want to poke at them sometimes and make them mad, just to be like, to show that they do it. So if you did like read War and Peace, you would probably come back, oh yeah, it was nice. It was nice. But so there's different levels, but clearly, like, what you're putting out there is top even on Eric's metric. That
No, fair enough. And I actually just got back from Missouri because each of these keynotes have asked me to do various lengths, right? Some said, look, we've only got 30 minutes in our program. Others say 45 minutes, an hour and a half. Missouri was one of the first states to say to me, we'd actually like you to fill a block of 2.5, almost 3 hours. And I was like, woo, like, how do you remain inspirational in a keynote for 3 hours? My attention span is not that long. And what I ended up doing was, just as I was describing that first part where I'm telling stories that I think were some of the successes that I've had in my career, or moments which are few and far between, where someone reaches back out to you and says, you changed my life, and here's what I want to thank you. What I did was I started with that part of the keynote, and then I paused and I spent probably a half hour or more asking every school psychologist in the room to reflect on their success stories, to tell the people at their table a story about some child that has reached out that said, thank you, you made a difference in my life, or just somebody that you can't sort of like stop thinking about the work that you did as a school psychologist. And then I asked for volunteers for the whole room. And what was amazing, because this was the first time I had done it and I wasn't sure how it would come off, every person who stood up to share a story started with, thank you for doing this. Thank you for asking me to remember the good parts of my job as opposed to all the things that weigh me down. And so, I know you that was part of your intro, Eric, but I think that's what's bringing hope to all of us in school psychology right now, is focusing on some of our successes.
I love that. And I want to, can we do that now?
Yes. Yes.
Let's do that now and have our audience too.
I love that. What a great idea, Rachel. I mean, I'll tell you mine if you guys want to share a couple of yours. I'll tell Eric. Eric heard this, but I'll share it for your audience. I start with my very first student on my very first day as a middle school psychologist, where I was the only school psychologist at a middle school for about 1,500 students. The phone rang and they told me that I had to go up to a classroom. And when I went up to this classroom, everybody was pointing to underneath the teacher's desk. And there was this little girl under the desk. And as I approached, she bolted. She ran out of the classroom, out the school building, and climbed a tree. And I'm standing under the tree trying to get her down. And I'm thinking, they never taught me this in graduate school. I'm not sure I know how to handle this. I was unsuccessful. We called her mom. Her mom came into the school. We made a plan. I thought it was a pretty good plan. On day 2, the phone rang again, but it was a little later in the day. And they said, go up to that classroom. I went up to the classroom. I barely got to the door. She bolted out the front door, up this tree. Now I'm standing underneath the tree, but the principal is next to me. And the principal says, you're going to fix this, right? And I still to this day have no idea what came out of my mouth or why it came out of my mouth. But I said, I bet if you cut all the lower branches of the tree, she can't climb that thing. And so that night, the custodians cut all the lower branches on the tree. On day 3, same thing happens. The phone rings. Young lady goes running out the school. She freezes in front of the tree. She can't climb the tree. And I convinced her to come back into my office. And we started a relationship at that point that was really one of the most memorable in my career. One that years later, the student and the family actually wrote me this beautiful thank you letter, and they referenced the tree in the thank you letter. And so that's one of my, I try to use laughter and humor in the work that we do as well, but that was one of the more memorable stories for me as a school psychologist. Okay, you guys.
Okay, I can go next. I love that story, Peter. And it made me think of my very first job as a school psychologist. I was the first school psychologist in a pre-K through 12 school, private school. They had never had a school psychologist before, and I had never really, apart from internship, been a school psychologist before. But they called me before school actually started in August because there had been a pretty terrible bus accident, and it happened near campus, and it was like visually very upsetting, and everybody ended up being okay, but it was upsetting, and there were injuries, and it was such a small school that the kids were really just shocked and devastated by it, and so were the adults. And they called me in for the next day to do some crisis counseling, and I was so scared. I didn't know how to make a difference and enter this community in that way. And but I showed up, and the head of school gave this beautiful opening assembly talk that this was a really difficult moment, but we're here together, and introduced me and said, she's here to just listen and for you to share your experience of what happened and any questions that you have. And so I had this little room, and the kids were coming in one after the other and just telling their stories and just feeling heard and knowing that how the emotions that they were feeling and the worries that they had were normal and valid. And one young man, he was in high school, said to me, I never talked to a psychologist before. That was really helpful. And I remember that was at the end of the day. And I didn't know really that I was being helpful, but that he said that, felt like just the biggest payday to know that I could add something good and add a sense of care and support for kids at a time that they were nervous and worried and upset. It just meant so much to me. And just that sense of like, I can make a difference. I don't have to like technically know every single thing in every single book that I ever read in grad school. I know what I'm doing, and I can keep going and improve and get better. So
Show up and care, right? If you show up and you care, I think that's a big part of it.
that's it. Yeah.
I guess I can go next. And anybody again who's watching, I know we have several viewers tonight. Please, I would love to hear even just little success stories from everybody. But I think I've told this one before, but with so many episodes, I'm just going to hope that people aren't probably hearing it for the second time. But there was a kid that came. There was discussion in like our RTI team, and this teacher kind of showed up, and he was a second grade student, and she said, he's the lowest student I've ever had in 40 years. This child cannot read. He was one that came to us. He was homeschooled prior, but we were suspicious that there really hadn't been any much education going on. And she just lamented about how he's not picking up reading and he just can't do anything. And of course I asked, are we in an intervention? What are we doing? And we just didn't have the staffing to do anything for this child. Plus there was attendance problems. It was just sporadic attendance. And so the team was kind of like, well, we don't have an intervention to do. We don't have the staffing to do. And so they were going to move forward with testing for special education. And I was just kind of dumbfounded and upset that, this is the outcome of this child. And I'm like, we don't know is that this is a disability. So I said, okay, I'm here 3 days a week. I'm going to pull him those 3 days a week. I'm going to do Siegfried Engelmann's Teach Your Child to Read in 100 Easy Lessons, phonics, 20 minutes a day. And I roped in a special ed teacher to get him the other 2 days that I wasn't there. And he was still continued to be very absent and whatnot. But we got through in that school year, I started the second half of the year, but we got through most of that book. And by the end of that book, he was reading amazingly. And then, we went on summer break and he came back and I could tell that he had continued to read and he was like, just took off. And it was so amazing. And then I got the Dibble scores of him in the beginning of the year and he was on grade level. And I was just like, it was just so, I was so happy that I felt like I could do that for him and give him that chance. And so that was, I think that will always be like my favorite, my favorite thing. He was a shy, cute little, sweet little kid. And, I get a little wave in the hall once in a while type of thing. But just when I saw those Dibble scores, I was just like through the roof on how he was. Yeah.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Yeah. You helped propel him to the next level, right? Really is what we do sometimes.
You're up, Eric.
All right. And that's awesome. And I have to say, like, we know each other's personalities as the podcasters. And so Rebecca's the counselor and encourager. Rachel is the interventionist. Like, so this is just beautiful because this is, we connect with our skill set, right? And make differences as we use our creativity. We use our areas of talent and skills and gifts to reach out. And so Peter's heard my story. I shared it at NASP. And I don't know, about 10 years ago or so, there was a student in my elementary school and she was missing her right hand and since birth. And I've always had a guitar in the office or a keyboard in the office at one point, and used music to strum and sing with the kids if and when needed, or assemblies, that sort of thing. And she said, "Do you think you could teach me how to play guitar?" And we were meeting regularly to just to talk about school and how she was navigating things. And I said, "Yeah, let's figure it out. Let's do it." And so I reached out to a gentleman who had made a guitar pick attachment for an older student, a music student of mine who had a stroke. And this gentleman had made a Velcro attachment for his thumb that had a pick attached to it because he couldn't grip to hold the pick. And this was very therapeutic for this gentleman to be able to play. And his right hand was affected. So I reached out to this guy. He's in California, and he makes guitar picks and attachments. And I said, do you think you could do this? And he said, yeah, no problem. And he sent me a picture of a kid he had made one for already. And he said, so get the kid's mom to do the measurements and get permission, and I'll send you some pics. And so I think we had a couple of them made, maybe 3 or 4. And every week we did guitar lessons, and it was therapeutic for both of us. And by the holiday assembly, we played together in front of the entire school. And a couple years later, the occupational therapist for the district said, there's a student who really wants to connect with you, who you used to do some guitar work with. Do you think you can come out to such and such school and bring your guitar? And I said, oh my God, I knew exactly who it was. And I said, sure. And so then throughout parts of middle school and high school, I was able to continue checking in with the student and strumming. And she has a YouTube channel, she sings, and it's just incredible. And, it's just one of those things where you go, yeah, let's just do it. Let's think outside the box. Don't hesitate. Just jump in. And 2 weeks ago, I had a really fascinating experience. This never happens to me, but I got a message on Facebook that said, and I actually have it pulled up on my phone, and I'll just read a short portion of it. It said, were you a counselor for schools near Rochester, New York at one point? I'm looking for an old mentor of mine when I was a kid that shares your name and plays guitar. And I knew immediately who it was. I knew the name, and I knew this was a student who had some trouble back 30 years ago. And I said, yeah, I know who you are. Yep, it's me. You found me. How are you doing? And he essentially said, I'm glad I found you after all these years. Hopefully it encourages you to know that you made a difference so long ago. Oh. And he's doing well. He has a family. And he just wanted to reach out and tell me that I made a difference. And I sat in my living room crying, because, you never know, right? This was 30 some years ago, my first job. And man, to know that I made a difference in a kid who was struggling, so we all have these stories. We might not all get the messages or the phone calls, but we're all touching people's lives.
Yeah. It's part of the challenge of the work that we do is there's no like button that we get at the end of the day. There's no immediate gratification, to your point, Eric, right? Sometimes we have to wait years before we start getting those messages. But how powerful that somebody takes the time to say, I was thinking of you and the impact that you made on my life, and I want to reach out and tell you that. I think that actually energizes me to no end as a school psychologist. And sadly, I think you all said it, we don't get those messages enough, but I think they're so powerful when we start to sort of lean into them and reflect on them. And that was really the impetus behind my presidential theme of being a catalyst or a catalyst in action, because I joke that I did not do well in chemistry in high school. It's probably the reason I'm a school psychologist, but in chemistry, there is this substance known as a catalyst, and it actually brings molecules together, makes them stronger, makes their bonds more efficient, helps change occur. And then it sort of steps away and lets those molecules do the good things that they do. And I give an example in my talk about catalysts being like a bridge that points in the direction that says, hey, come over here. If you want to get across the river, this is the easiest spot to do it. And I'm the bridge. I'm going to help you get across. And once those people, one person, 10 people, 1,000 people cross, the bridge still remains the same. It sort of remains doing that work. And I think a lot of that, reminds me of what school psychologists do. We're sort of pointing people in a direction. We're bringing people together. We're helping change occur. And then we, hopefully we don't burn out in the process. Hopefully we remain, still able to do that work for the rest of our careers.
It makes me think during the pandemic, the three of us used to check in regularly, and there was so much out of our control, and, so many things we were trying to figure out as we went, but we just would keep saying to each other, we're just going to show up and do the smallest bits of good that we can. And whether that's with one student or a classroom or whomever, a teacher, an administrator, that's what we can control.
Yeah. And I know that, and you're right, so right, Rebecca, that's the work that we do, like one student at a time, right? I mean, it's just sort of like how we're built for doing this. And then the more I realize there is tremendous power in the relationships when we come together. And then you made me think of that when you said that the three of you leaned into each other during the pandemic. And I think when life gets a little chaotic and uncertain and unpredictable and ambiguous, that is what will save us, is actually coming together and bonding, right? Sort of building the sense of community or building the relationships where we do work together, because it's too often we want to just disconnect because it feels easier. We're exhausted, but it's almost that we've got to re-engage with each other in order to really maintain our own health.
We were having conversations too, following the election and just some of our feelings and whatnot, and talking about, and it's okay to kind of step back and regroup and like feel those feelings. And we don't, to get to a point where hopefully eventually we can kind of rise up and take more action and do that. But just, acknowledging that it's okay to just live in that for a little bit and lean on each other. And then, when we're ready, kind of get back to it. So, yeah.
Yeah, the election was tough. I mean, for those of us that work in education, I think there was a lot of hope that was swirling around. And, I do try to remember that 51% of the country voted, differently than I did. And that half of our country really, I think, is saying quite loud that they are struggling and that they want some change. And they're just looking for places for that. But there was a lot of emotion, I think, early on, and there will be for a very long time. And, not to sort of like jump too quickly to, the advice part of it, but I still am feeling very strongly that NASP and school psychologists have been tremendous advocates for a very long time. And I'm not sure anything has changed with regards to that. We are going to continue to have to be advocates for those that don't always get a voice, for those who don't always, have an opportunity for their voice to be heard. It's sort of ingrained in the work we do. And part of that advocacy is, doing it together, right? It's impossible to sort of do that work alone. So, I do encourage people to continue to get involved. It hasn't always been about the politics with NASP. It's actually been about the people and the students and the families. And so I keep trying to remind people of that, regardless of who we are working with. We're going to be strong, loud advocates for youth and family.
That's right. And that sense of having a community, when things are hard and things are confusing or uncertain, that there are some things that we are very certain about, and advocating for our students and our school communities, and just showing up and being there to look out for, like you said, people who may not have, children who don't have a voice, or, young people. I think that's so important that we can lean into each other and look to NASP and other school psychologists for this sense of belonging that we might need as we adjust to the uncertainty in the bigger world.
We had a viewer who shared a story, so I'm going to put that up there. It's in a couple different parts, but I'll read it out. So during a social skills session, I introduced a picture exchange communication PECS to help a nonverbal third grade student with autism express needs and preferences. After weeks of modeling and guidance, the student independently used a break card during a challenging task, visibly reducing their anxiety. I celebrated the moment, validated the student's effort, and immediately honored the request, allowing the student to take a short sensory break and return to the task more focused. This milestone demonstrated the student's growing ability to self-advocate and underscored the effectiveness of individualized communication supports in fostering meaningful progress. That is awesome.
That's amazing. Love that example. One of the things I have been showing is this photo mosaic. It's a picture that, you can see the face or the person in the large image, but it's actually made up of tiny little pictures from their life, or that you choose to kind of make up the larger image. I don't know if I'm doing a great job of describing it, but I can send you a copy. What I like referencing that for, what I like using it is to say, when we have a really good day, we can zoom in on the individual photo and say, today was a really good day. Something amazing happened, like that example from your viewer, where we're going to just celebrate that. And on a day where you have a bad day, you almost have to zoom out and say, today is not going to make up that big picture of who this student is. And so I've been using that in my own personal life and professional life to say, did I have a good day or a not so good day? I'm going to choose to zoom in or zoom out on the big picture or the daily wins.
I
I love that. Yeah, go ahead, Rebecca.
We're twinning again.
Yes.
It just reminded me, I think it's you, Peter, that shows the lollipop moment video in a couple of your talks. And I just love that video. So I wondered if you could kind of summarize that message, because I always found that so powerful.
I'm trying to remember what the lollipop one is, though. I don't know if that is me.
Okay, maybe it's Dr. Kelly. I'm not sure, but the lollipop video is this video with this gentleman who described he worked at a college, and it was the first day of school of university, and kids were registering for classes, and there was this young woman in line, and she's with her parents, and she just says, Mom, Dad, I don't think I can do this. Actually, I need to go. Let's get out of here. And at that same moment, he walks up to her. He was handing out candy. He just worked for the university. And he gave the candy to a young man and said to him, don't be rude. Offer that beautiful young woman a piece of candy. And she took the candy that he offered, and he turned to her parents and said, you see that? First day of school, and she's already taking candy from strangers. And they all cracked up, and he walked away. But 4 years later, this woman walked into his office and said, do you remember me? Remind him of the story and said, you didn't know it, but I was about to quit and leave school, and I didn't think I could do it. And you did that. And me and that guy, we've been dating for 4 years, and I'm about to graduate, and I really just owe you that thanks. And so the whole video is about these small things that we do, these little moments of kindness that we can share, can be so important. And we don't often get, like you said before, and like Eric said, we don't get those messages often, but they can still be there. And when we do get them, they're so priceless.
Yeah. It's a big part of what's keeping me going, I think, in these early days, right, is just trying to focus on the small interactions, the small moments, no matter where I am, having conversations, the little gestures of kindness that either I'm able to give someone else or, in such a beautiful fashion, because I've been traveling the country so often, meeting school psychologists, I feel like they are so kind and generous to me to say things like, we're so grateful for NASP, or the work that NASP does, or that you're doing in representing the organization. And, it really is filling my cup. And yet I sometimes I just don't feel worthy, right? I just feel like we're all doing really amazing things. And I try to, remind them of that. But that is a great great story, a great video. I think now that you share it, I have definitely seen that video, but I'm going to include it in my next couple presentations. So.
That's awesome. Yeah, I remember hearing that too. And I don't know, it might have been John Kelly. And so, Peter, not to confuse you with John.
It happens a lot.
That's not fair though, right? You're both individuals.
He's better looking. We can just say it, Eric. It's all right. I'm used to it by now.
I love you both the same. I was just thinking, and I think this is something Rebecca said to me years ago. We don't want to be remembered for our worst day, right? We want to remember, it's all part of the big picture. And so when we do have a bad day, that's not the worst of the worst. It's not our best. It's just one day in the process. Yeah. And we don't need to reflect on that as the epitome of, how we're doing and let it drag us down.
Yeah. And Rebecca said, you used the word belonging before. I mean, that is another one of those sort of key elements of the presentation that I give, is just reminding people about the belonging research and the frameworks and the information, the strategies, even going back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I mean, this is something we got on day one of graduate school. And in the center of that pyramid is love and belonging. And if we really try to remember that when we enter certain situations, I think we could do a lot of good. I think we could just foster a lot of goodwill that will certainly come back and pay itself forward. But that belonging research, I think, is really powerful. And, quite often we just get caught in our daily routines. And it's almost like, let me pause and just think about, does a student feel a sense of belonging? That sense of belonging looks very different for every individual. Sometimes I would go into a situation saying, oh, I know what to do. I'm going to make them feel really like known throughout the school. And some students don't want that, right? I mean, they want to be needed, or they want to be accepted, or there's different sort of elements of belonging. And I just like to remind practitioners of that. Think a little bit of, belonging is key, but think about the way in which people want to feel a sense of belonging.
And we had Peter, one of your new friends that you met at NASP with me, one of my colleagues, Erin.
Tell me it's Erin.
It's Erin. She chimed in with a little story too. When she first started her career at an inner city high school, a girl came in crying to her office and wanted to talk. And after a few weeks of stopping in for daily support, Erin found out that she was a third-year freshman and was failing everything, self-medicating, smoking a lot of weed. And Erin had referred her to special education. She qualified and received supportive services and eventually graduated after 5 years. And has reached out to Erin to say that she saved her life. She was going to drop out and would never have felt like she would never amount to anything. And Erin was the only one who told her she could do great things and not give up. And she has a career now. She's working for Amtrak, driving trains, has a successful job. And every now and then she reaches out or tags Erin in a post. And Erin realized that she was changing the course of people's lives. And that was very eye-opening for her. And it never really hit her until that moment, how much we can help. So that's fantastic.
I love that. And I think Erin says this in her quote, it's not just changing lives, it's like saving lives in some cases, right? It's really hard to prove a negative. It's really hard to say, you were destined for something awful. And I helped you turn the corner, but that is literally what we do. So it's a good reminder. Yay, Erin.
And we have our friend Nick too. I'll jump in with Nick's if shout out to Nick, who is I think finishing internship or just starting his career, but he has been a part of the podcast since day one, since he was an undergrad. He's been engaged in school psychology and making a difference as a grad student, and just always asks fantastic questions and shares great ideas. So he points out, I've had so many success stories already in his young career, To be honest, though, I feel alone and not seen as a Black male in school psychology. We're still underrepresented, and he's curious about what NASP can do in the future to address the diverse needs of school psychologists, particularly Black men in the field. He's out in California with the Larry P. case. That looms over practitioners in California, can be very isolating.
Yeah, Nick, thank you. And I know Nick only because I saw the little picture that got posted there. I wasn't sure who you were referencing at first. Nick, first of all, thank you. And so grateful to hear that you're reaching out and taking advantage of all the resources that school psychology has to offer, including this podcast. And Rachel, Eric, and Rebecca, they're pretty amazing in this space. He said it very clearly. I'll just repeat his words that we have an underrepresentation of people of color, and diversity is one of the key messages in my keynote about where things need to change. Sometimes I'll give the example, there's times where I live, I'll have dinner with neighbors or friends who are not in education, and they'll say, I don't understand what's wrong with education. Why do you think it needs to change? And I'll ask questions like, how many of you are using the same cell phone that you were using 20 years ago? How many of you are driving, the same type of vehicle, right? I mean, things have changed dramatically, but if you look at sometimes the work that we're doing in schools, it's the same approaches that we've been using for 100 years. And so there's a lot that needs to change, but I think diversity is the top of that list. We really do have to engage in social justice work. We've got to draw more people from various groups to the field of school psychology. The best example I can think of is the NASP Exposure Project. And I love the concept of it because it's relatively simple, and I also think incredibly impactful. Whenever I ask someone, how did you enter the field of school psychology? They will often say it happened a little bit by chance. It happened because they were sort of going down one path and someone said to them, do you know about school psychology? And the answer is like, no, I don't know. What is school psychology? Tell me more. And then they diverted their path. It happened to me. I took a psychology class in high school, fell in love with psychology, but I had always loved working with children in the summer camps and recreation after school. It wasn't until graduate school that somebody said, how come you're not a school psychologist? You like kids and you like psychology? And I'm like, what's that? We have to almost be more intentional with talking to high school youth about what our profession is, what it does. I think there are many more school psychologists sort of sitting in the wings, waiting to get involved, waiting to do this kind of work that we just spent the first half hour talking about, right? Really impactful, life-changing, life-saving kinds of work. But we need to bring people to the field who represent and look like the students and the youth and the families that actually are in our school systems. And so, yeah, Nick, we need to get the word out that we need more men of color, women of color, diverse backgrounds, all of it. We just need more people into the field, and that's related to, our shortages and the ratios. We could certainly talk about those kind of things as well, but I'm glad Nick brought that up.
Yeah. And I would, sort of echo that and add, for those of us in the field who do have some privilege or power, systems need to change, right? Mm-hmm. Everyone needs to have a seat at the table and have a voice that's amplified and listened to. And, mm-hmm. And sometimes we need to, sort of step up and sort of try to open the doors so that everyone voice is heard and everyone has a seat at the table. And that sometimes takes us just standing up and working on these systems a little bit, changing things.
Eric, it's a great point. I really do feel like there are spaces that, say, you and I as white men can enter and have influence on that, unfortunately, others, right, either gender or race or don't have that same ability to sort of change minds or have conversations to really get more of the masses, more people thinking sort of the way we are with regards to this. I think there's still a lot of people who probably are listening to these conversations and saying, How come NASP doesn't just go back to telling me about like, doing my practice, right? I just want to learn some skills to go to work every day. And it's a conversation we have to have constantly about the inequities that exist in schools. And that is only going to change if we've got everybody working on it, not just, the groups that are impacted or affected, maybe.
Yeah, it reminds me, what you just said, Peter, reminds me of a quote that John Lewis said, which essentially is encouraging us that this is not a fight for one day or 1 hour or 1 week. It's a battle that will just continue, and we need to continuously stand up and do what's right. And he ends the quote. I can't do the quote word for word, but he ends it with saying, "Get into some good trouble." And I just love John Lewis, and what a great reminder. Yeah, we need to just stand up and get into those spaces and get into some good trouble there.
And maybe even more so right now, right?
Yes, exactly.
It brings me back to your theme and your metaphor of being catalysts for change. The catalyst is an accelerator, but it's not necessarily the main ingredient or the sort of the center of the stage, right?
That is exactly right. Yeah. I think there's an elegance in the analogy of being catalyst for school psychologists, because often when you're talking to school psychologists, they don't see themselves as the main ingredient. They're like, no, there's all these bigger groups, and if only my administrator this, and only if my school board that, right? There's all this sort of like thinking about the people that allegedly have the power to make these changes and decisions, which is why I like the idea of a catalyst, which is, well, then let's bring people together. Let's bring energy to the situation. Let's make change occur. Let's lower the reaction that sort of needs to make that happen. And I think school psychologists are trained to do it. I think we are doing it, right? I don't even want to make it sound like we're not constantly doing this work. I think we are. I just would love to celebrate it more. And we're coming off the tail end of National School Psych Week. I saw more posts. I don't think this was just me. I saw more posts from school districts, from large organizations, from lawmakers. I mean, from all corners of the world. I really think our time is here where people recognize the value and the work of school psychologists. And I want to keep making sure that we're celebrating that.
I was surprised. I was pleased when here in Maryland, the governor lit up the governor's mansion, the house there, for school psychologists for the week, and people were sharing that around. I was like, that's so exciting. So I've been seeing things like that people in different states and communities, I always felt like it was always just like school psychologists, yay, celebrate ourselves. But other people seem to be, joining with us to celebrate the work that we can do. So it's really encouraging.
I agree.
We got some nice comments in the chat. One viewer says, I think school psychologists are the most underrated professionals in education. Everything from curriculum delivery to related services rely on the student's ability to engage socially and emotionally, and a ton of kids lack the appropriate skills to do so. Thank you for your awesome work. As a supervisor of special education, I would not be anywhere nearly as effective as I am without you. That's really meaningful.
That's awesome. And exactly what we were talking about. Lots of different people recognize the value of our work as school psychologists. It's starting to feel good in that way. So.
And Eric, not to single you out, but I know that you shared somebody pretty exciting sharing about school psychologists and who you know. And so we all know that you've worked with him and you have shaped what he knows of school psychologists. And so we know that when he's sharing this out, we're all like, he's kind of talking about Eric. So can you elaborate on what I'm talking about?
Sure. Well, first, the poster, the commenter who flies under the radar is someone I also work with as well. So appreciate my colleagues here giving us props because we have an incredible team, and I'm so proud to work in my school district. But I'm immensely proud to have worked with Miguel Cardona, our Secretary of Education, and he gave us an incredible shout out to school psychologists that, as Peter said, all these national people are making, comments about how amazing school psychologists are and the hard work and the good work that we do. And so Miguel gave a really nice shout out saying that, he's worked with tremendous school psychologists and he's proud to have worked with us. And those of us who have worked with him as school psychologists have helped shape some of his views on education and social and emotional support. And that was really touching. And yeah, my wife, reshared it and said, "I know who you're talking about." So it was really cute. I'm proud to have been a cog in that wheel somewhere along the line. So, but proud of all of us. I mean, really, as Rachel mentioned, during the pandemic, we chatted probably daily, and we still chat a lot. And Rebecca and I do case studies frequently, and we rely on each other, and it's immensely encouraging. And so now we're wrapping you into the family here, Peter. So you'll get a phone call at 7 a.m. when I'm on the treadmill.
Done. Anytime. I would love that. You can text me. I'm up early. I'm up late. So weekends, anytime. This year I work for you as NASP president. So, you get a hotline to me at any time you need. And Rachel, thank you for bringing up Miguel Cardona. I watched his video multiple times myself, and his words are just so powerful. He gets us. He gets children and schools and the challenges and how to get through these challenges. I'm just really a big fan, and to know that Eric impacted his, journey, right? I'm hoping he sends you a thank you note soon. Like, Eric, you really changed my life. I wouldn't have been Secretary of Education without you. That's the kind of message I'm waiting for now.
I will tell you, I'm not holding my breath on that. I mean, I think he has I give him credit for all he's accomplished. But he sent me a congratulations note a few years ago when I was school psych of the year. And I kept it. He was our state bureau chief of education.
Wow.
And I still have it. And he's had a meaningful impact on me, as our supervisors and colleagues who are chiming in here, and all of us as school psychs. Like, as Rebecca reminds us, none of us is as skilled as all of us. We do this work together, and we couldn't make it without each other.
Yeah. And speaking of that, just for all of you school psychs out there, Eric, Rachel, and I found each other in a time where we needed motivation and balance from burnout and inspiration. And that's why I do case conceptualizations with Eric, because I like sequestered him as my permanent supervisor. And I just needed mentorship after that first day on the job where I didn't know what I was doing. I knew I needed community, and I wanted, peer supervision and collaboration. And I wanted to create some belonging for myself and some just positive, sort of a positive feedback loop to be able to say, here's what I'm working on, and what do you think, and do you have any ideas? And this team, I'm so proud of having this team, because it absolutely makes me better, but they are so just wonderful in themselves. And I encourage all of you out there to do that too. Connect with your colleagues, reach out. And I know, Nick, your connection is so invaluable on our podcast, but you're a great example of that too, of just seeking out support and mentorship. And it's an inspiration. So I hope that everyone does that. If you're feeling, uncertain or a little, on the edge of burning out, or wondering, trying to remember your why, seek out others, seek out us, comment and message us. We're here, and we're so proud to be part of this community. And It's just such a helpful thing to have, is a sense of belonging in your professional community.
And I know that NASP has so many committees and club groups and things going on too, that I'm sure that you're kind of like, it seems, and I don't want to, maybe I'm wrong, but it seems like the president, like you tour around, you go to the different state associations, you're like the face of NASP. And so you're meeting with all these different groups, correct? So yeah. I'm sure that you're seeing like amazing stuff happening. I don't know if we're kind of running our clock down here, and I want to be mindful of time, but I'd love to hear about just some of the things that you're seeing out there that's inspiring you as you're doing these travels and this work.
No, thank you, Rachel. I appreciate that. And yes, I mean, if I start with just NASP, right? I mean, you mentioned it, there are communities and interest groups and task forces. There's micro volunteering opportunities, want ads that come out to get involved in committee work or advocacy work. I mean, there's so much that I would just love to, again, repeat and amplify what you're all saying, which is get involved, right? I mean, stay close to each other. And I think there's a real energy and strength that prevents that burnout. So thank you for highlighting that message. And then states are incredible. I mean, regardless of the size, I've been to so many different states this year. I'm not going to get to all of them. It's impossible. I wish I had a bus that just did a bus tour and took me to all 50, but the locations, the people, the conversations, the presentations, the fun, right? I'm thinking of Georgia, which was one of my early ones. They unveiled their new mascot, the Great Gatsby, and it's this white-tailed deer, and someone was dressed up in a deer costume and came out. And I mean, the energy that was at the convention was just infectious. To Missouri, which I just was there, and they started their conference with the award ceremony. So the very first thing everybody did when they were together in a room was they celebrated the work and gave out awards for all this incredible stuff. It was such a terrific way to get started, even to smaller places. I was in Iowa, and Iowa, has a very small gathering because professional development is happening in these regions, but they partnered with the Social Work Association to share a space and to share speakers. And so people are really incredibly creative. I mean, I could go on with a list of Omaha, Arizona. I mean, everywhere I've been, there's just been something remarkable that you see happening on the ground in these, in these states, in these communities of engagement. It's really beautiful.
That's awesome. Have been glancing at, the chat. We've had lots of good comments, and thank you everybody for the great feedback. And it's just making me feel better after, being a little bit down in the dumps. So we knew we brought the right person on, Dr. Faustino, to raise us up a little bit and give us kind of some support and a little bit of a push to kind
anytime you need it, I'm here for you.
Sounds good. Eric, Rebecca, and anyone watching, any other last comments, questions before we start to wrap up?
Just to say thank you, Peter, really, this is, what you do, you elevate us so wonderfully, and I'm so grateful for you. And thank you for sharing your time with us tonight. And really so proud to connect with you and to be a part of all that you're doing for NASP. And proud of our organization. So just want to say
it's my honor and my privilege, Eric. I really feel very privileged this year to have this opportunity. And so I want to make the most of it. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
I just want to ditto that. When we thought of who could we have on to give us some hope and share messages of hope and, positivity in this uncertain time, we immediately thought of you. I'm so happy to have you in our corner and have you be a supporter of the podcast, but of School Psychologists. You're an inspiration. And if you do have a NASP tour bus, you probably will have a few groupies, because we've heard from some of them, and that could really fun too.
You will be able to spot the NASP tour bus. It's going to have a picture of Gumby wrapped around the outside of it. So he's a good friend, in case you didn't know.
And that's funny because the picture that immediately popped into my head when you talked about the tour bus was just your face like on a bus and seeing it like driving down the highway and be like, ah, there he goes.
I think decals are easy to get. I might put one on my car and drive around the neighborhood, but I'm pretty sure my daughters will be appalled and embarrassed if I do that. So, although I'm not above that. So yeah, you've given me a great idea.
That's awesome. I just for everyone, in 2 weeks, December 1st, we have Sahaj Kaur Kohli from Brown Girl Therapy coming, and that will be exciting. She's amazing. So please.
Yes, wonderful. So we'll have more messages of hope from her. And her book is fantastic. It's called But What Will People Think? So if anyone wants to take a look at it before our episode in 2 weeks, we welcome you to come on and ask her your questions. That's going to be a great episode.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you guys so much.
Thanks,
Keep up the
Peter.
great
Thanks,
work.
everyone.
Good night, everyone.